All right, part 3 of your notes is going to be on acclimating to hot conditions. All right, so if we look at the picture here, this is of the world, and you notice the closer to the equator, the hotter it is. So the closer we are to the equator, the more we need to acclimate to the environment for heat-related conditions. All right, so heat acclimation, it's a natural adaptation to improve climate tolerance and exercise performance. You should acclimate for about 10 to 14 days. That means you must exercise in the environment, not just expose yourself to the environment. So not just going out and standing in the sun, but actually doing activity so you can have some physiological changes that will improve with your performance. So when we adapt to the heat, we have chronic or long-term physiological adaptations. The first set of adaptations are cardiovascular adaptations. They take about 1 to 5 days, or they occur within the first 5 days of exercising outside. So what happens here is we increase our plasma volume due to salt retention. This allows for an increased rate of sweat production. This also increases our stroke volume to maintain our cardiac output, because as we exercise in the heat, or as we exercise in general, naturally our resting heart rate will go down. So also the rate of perceived exertion, so how hard the exercise is or how bad the exercise is reduced also within the first 5 days. This also, because of the blood distribution being altered, less is supplied to the skin and more blood is supplied to the skeletal muscle. So it reduces the rate of muscle glycogen by anaerobic processes. So as we learn to exercise in the heat and we acclimate, we decrease the amount of anaerobic byproducts, so lactic acid. In that second week, we have thermoregulatory changes. These thermoregulatory changes mean that we have a decreased core resting temperature, we increase our rate of sweating, we are more dilute in our sweat, so the pH of our sweat is less because the rate of salt loss is less. And then we have an earlier onset of sweat production, so we start sweating at a lower temperature, which is important because then as our bodies acclimate, we don't get overheated. So this table here shows that exercise in hot conditions is more effective in inducing adaptations than just exposure to hot conditions. So heat acclimation process, these are general guidelines. Our state puts out guidelines for football and for how we should acclimate the first 2 to 3 weeks of practice. This is very similar to it, where we can't have more than a 3-hour practice in that first week, and in that second week and beyond, a 3-hour, total of 5 hours in a double session. So if you had 2-a-days, you couldn't practice more than 5 hours in a day. You could have a 1-hour walkthrough time, but it has to be separate from the practice of 3 continuous hours. So if we wanted to practice from 9 to 12 and then come back at 2, that would be fine because it is separated from the continuous practice. But when we come back in that afternoon session at 2, we could only do a walkthrough. All right, first 2 days is non-contact, and then contact with blocking dummies, so with padding, and then full contact starting day 6. So when we are acclimating, we need to do this over a period of time. Let's say we decide that we want to sit inside all summer after playing spring football. I know we don't have spring football right now, but let's just use that as an example. So, because spring football would have started today. So let's say we do the workouts for 2 weeks for spring football, and then we take June off. All right, well, what's going to happen is when we come back in July, all the acclimatization that we've had with increased or decreased heart rate, decreased core temperature, all these physiological responses are going to be lost. Within a week, we will start to lose our adaptations when we move to a cooler environment. Within 3 weeks, we lose 75% of the adaptations. So, for instance, last year during football, we took the month of July off because we had 2 dead periods, which are required, so we took the middle week off. We took 3 straight weeks off with football last year. With doing that, what we have done in what we did in May and in June, we lost with those 3 weeks if the kids did not do activities on their own. There were some athletes that still went out and did their exercises and did stuff out in the heat, and then there were some that sat in the air condition 24/7, and well, we know how last season went. So it's very important that once we have these adaptations, we keep them by doing activity in the heat. We can re-acclimatize, and it is typically easier to accomplish than the initial acclimatization. So when you're injured and you're not practicing for a couple weeks and you come back from injury, acclimatizing to the heat is possible, and it is easier than the initial phase.